Hi, my name's Scott. I'm a food photographer based in the UK, and today we're going to be looking at focal length. Specifically, we're going to be looking at how to choose the right focal length for your food photograph, and we're going to be looking at flat lays today. I call them flat lays, you might call them something else, but we're talking about the shots where we shoot top down, straight onto the ground. You can see my camera, I'm looking at my screen, see where it is. Back here, whee, there we go. This is set up for a flat lay. This is my studio stand that I use to shoot my flat lays. Most of my images are flat lays. It's just the trend at the moment. And rather than with the other lens comparison videos where we're going, well, if you shoot with a 17mm lens, which is what this is here, you get this huge expanse going on behind us. Or if you shoot with a 200mm lens, it will really compress the background down. That doesn't really make sense in this context because the background is exactly where it is. Sure, we can have a wider lens and get closer, a longer lens and get further away, but we're going to look at exactly what these lenses do. And today we're going to be looking at the 35 and 50 Sigma Art lenses, as well as the 100mm Carl Zeiss planar lens. So earlier this week, I had a bit of an editorial shoot, and these are pretty low key. They're not big budget. There's not, creative directors milling around. So I ran a bit of a time lapse to show you how I set these shots up. And then we're going to dive straight in to the actual shooting of these images and looking at how they differ from 35, 50 to 100mm with the same image shot 3 times with the camera just adjusted up and down on the stand until we get the same composition. So editorial shoots are pretty low budget. Don't always have a creative director on set, definitely not for this one. We use the same lighting setup all day because we just don't have time to be jumping around. We might slightly modify it, so I've got a scrim, softbox, and a couple of V-flats. And then, we just took the shots, 3 different images, 35mm, 50mm, and 100mm. Nothing changed but the lens and the height of the camera on the stand, which you can see sort of jumping up and down in this video. So I've brought the images into Lightroom, and I've got the JPEGs here. I actually slightly processed them in Capture One, which is my preferred editing software of choice. It's just, I know most people use Lightroom, and I also find it easier to do these sorts of things in Lightroom, and I have the Adobe suite for various reasons, but there we go. So this was the actual shot. I'd chosen the 100mm lens to make this shot. It's nothing fancy, pretty simple composition, nothing extraordinary happening here. It's a bit of a throwaway image almost. Now, the reason I chose that 100mm lens was because of the circular bowls and just the scale of the shot. It's quite a small shot. I wanted to keep the shape of the bowls and the integrity of them. I didn't want the spoons to be bowing, and I wanted, the liquid to look like it's fallen as it should do. We get there we go. So you can tell them use Capture One and get just a little bit of separation. Let's catch up. This is one of the reasons why I don't use Lightroom. It's a bit slow. So you can see the bowl to the background. It's just pulling away with the depth of field. I get my camera settings up. There it goes at f4, 160 ISO. And this gives a lovely detailed image. There's nothing really to write home about. It isn't an interesting look because of the lens, but it gives you very factual flat lays, and I think it's really useful. Now, the downside to this, obviously, is if it was a bigger shot, you'd have to have the camera, 10 meters up in the air, which we have had to do in the past, and we try to avoid if possible. Excuse my creaky chair. There we go. So, at the other end of the spectrum is the 35mm lens. Now, if I just quickly flick back to the 100, if you look at the liquid in the bowls, it suddenly looks like it's moving. Now, it has moved a bit. You can see where after the actual shot that we took, I'd moved it slightly and it's dropped down. But more than that, it's losing its sort of shape. And you can also see that it's losing the detail and the edges of the stew. So we've lost some detail. I tried to focus as best I could exactly, on this bean here. But it does seem that as we come to the corners of the image, it's bending away a little bit. We're not quite as sharp. The spoons look okay. They're a little bit distorted. They've lost a bit of their shape, but nothing major. But you can see how the two bowls look like they're sort of being torn away from each other, which is not ideal, and especially for this sort of shot, but it does have its place. Now, the 50mm lens is obviously a bit of a happy medium. So the camera's at a workable height. I wasn't having to go up a ladder to focus it if you're not using live view, for example. I'd say the sharpness in the corners is considerably better. It's not distorting as much, but it is still distorting. You do get distortion on a 50mm lens, but it is nowhere near, if we just jump back, that of the 35. Now, compositions are exactly the same. It's actually quite difficult to do that because of the focal length without the images just looking completely different. But if you look at the bowls here, you can see how they're sort of at 50 millimeters, they look a little bit like they're bowing away. There's a bit of perhaps pin cushioning going on. At 35 millimeters, it looks like sort of, there's a bit of a warp going on. The whole thing's pulling apart. As we get to 100, it just feels comfortable. But that's not to say that 100 millimeters is the right focal length. So I'm going to jump into my portfolio and show you a few different images and how I've used the lenses to their advantage to get the best out of them. Now, my website's a bit dated. I apologize in advance. It needs a massive revamp. I've shot loads of really important stuff since then, but unfortunately, as you get busy, you stop updating. So, jumping into this, we're only going to look at 35mm cameras rather than medium format. So, this shot here was taken with the 35mm lens, and it is one of the more popular ones that sells. It's got distortion, you can see with the orange juicer, it's sort of tilting out and almost falling over. But it works in this shot because of the vignetting and because of the scale of the shot. And the reason I chose the 35mm lens was because the only other lens I owned at the time was 100mm. So it was either jump up on the ceiling to try and get the flat lay or use the 35, so I used the 35. It works. It could have been better with a 50 perhaps, but in the context of what we had and the available space in my equipment, this was great. Now, this lens here was shot on the 35mm lens, and we used it for the distortion. So you see how on top and bottom of the table, the drinks are slightly bowing over. Now, if I'd have shot this with a 100mm lens, all you would see would be perfectly round discs of liquid. And that's no use to anybody, because I'm trying to show what the drinks are. We need to see it's lager with a head, or it's a bitter with a head, or it's a glass of wine. Just seeing the top of that glass isn't going to add anything. So using that wider lens and getting the distortion there is really important. Likewise with shots like this, it's a big wide expanse. We've got a glitter cannon going off. There was no way I could get that shot with a 100mm lens in the room that we're in on that day. I wasn't in my studio, I was on location. We didn't even have a studio stand. I had to stand on a ladder, have my assistant counterweight it whilst I dangled off the edge with my really heavy camera, trying not to drop it on all the food. So in those instances, it's great. Now with the 50 being a little bit less distorty, but still giving you that really intimate feeling, for things like this where you're just singling out an item and you're shooting at 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, it can create a really beautiful image. And using that depth of field for interest, I think it's a great tool. It was overused for a long time, but it really is a useful thing to have in your arsenal. Likewise with the flat lays, this is web rest doesn't really do it justice, but this was shot at f2 on a 50 megapixel sensor. I've just jumped around a bit, my camera just stopped recording, which is brilliant. Now, moving on from the 50mm lens, we'll look at the 100mm lens. Using this lens I see it as more of a precision lens. When you're shooting anything which has circles in it and you want them to keep their integrity or any straight lines, the 100mm lens is great. It's not so long like a 200 or 300mm lens that the compression's immense, but it lets us keep the shape of the glass. The oval at the top, the opening of the glass stays the right shape. Your straight lines stay straight, which is brilliant. Whereas you see with this slightly wider shot, the glass and the jar, they're all slightly falling over themselves. They're not quite right. So this image has got to go. It's not great. There's an exaggerated, showing of how the plate and everything's all falling over because it's shot on a 35mm lens. It's one of my first food photos. I didn't own anything else, so I used a 35mm lens, but you can see how much it's distorting. Whereas with a 100mm lens, you get this beautifully compressed image. Everything's the shape it should be. It's not what your eye sees, but it's certainly what your brain wants to see. So here with the San Miguel, I should be able to say that better because I'm Spanish, but I can't. With the San Miguel, the pint glass is the correct shape, the cans are the correct shape. Likewise with the chopsticks here, it's all as it should be. And that's what we want sometimes. Not always. Sometimes we want the distortion, we want the drama, we want the intimacy. But other times, we want to show things exactly as they are. It's more of a recording of what we have. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please hit like, please subscribe. It'd be great to have you along for the journey. I'm going to try and just verbally vomit everything I know about food photography that I've learned over the last decade into a YouTube channel, and hopefully it'll be of some use, because when I was starting out and I wanted to make a career as a food photographer, there's lots of information on how to take food pictures, but not on how to be a food photographer, which is a very different thing. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you all next time.